Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. One story that got a lot of traction towards the end of last week was the announcement that Fox is prepping a Gambit solo movie for Channing Tatum. And it was really nice to see Fox, and especially the X-Men franchise, get on the board publicity-wise after Marvel totally dominated for most of the week, and then DC before that. And if you actually stay tuned for today's viewer question, it's about the potential overcrowding of the comic book genre itself, and also what it's going to do to the overall release schedule for Hollywood. But let's right now focus on this Gambit solo movie. And again, it got a lot of attention. And one might say, well, that's because Channing Tatum's involved, and he is arguably, I think, one of the biggest stars working in Hollywood today, and one of the most admirable. If you check out my press conference coverage of him for the Book of Life, he's just such a down-to-earth guy and very professional. It's really refreshing to see. But then I thought, well, wouldn't any X-Men movie, any X-Men solo movie that wasn't Wolverine, get a lot of coverage in the press, because people really are enjoying that franchise, particularly now that it's gotten back on track with Bryan Singer with Days of Future Past, and he's going to be sticking around for X-Men Apocalypse. So I think that franchise is in a very good place right now. But then as I followed that train of thought, I was like, well, what other solo movies would they announce? And I thought, well, of course, Mystique, especially because she's now played by Jennifer Lawrence. And I'd love to see a solo Mystique movie because, as I've said in earlier coverage, I'd rather she get her own film than focus on her so heavily in the team films. I think that they really need to spread out the number of characters they pay attention to, because those are supposed to be the group films, not the Magneto, Wolverine, Mystique, and somewhat Professor Xavier films, and everybody else just comes in for a moment to show off their powers in a cool action sequence. That's kind of the formula they have right now. But then I thought, well, you know what? There's nobody else really to focus on, because they're switching over the cast thanks to this, going back in time, the way they've decided to reboot the franchise, or, when you have timelines, is it really a reboot? But they've shifted it. And so I thought, well, who else would there be? Especially because the biggest, most popular X-Men are currently in the process of being recast, and we don't know who's going to play them. And I'm talking about Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Storm. And I know a lot of you want to see Lupita Nyong'o as Storm, but I just don't think it's going to happen because she's in Star Wars. And I think not only is that going to take up a lot of her time in terms of both filming and publicity, but I think she's going to want to make other kinds of films, especially to keep herself part of the Oscar race going forward, much like, say, Amy Adams, who does a good job of balancing commercial films and, Oscar bait movies. I think Lupita Nyong'o is going to want to do the same thing. So I wouldn't expect to see her joining the X-Men probably ever. But, never say never. We'll see. But, those characters haven't been cast. And then, I'm not sure that James McAvoy could carry a movie, or if people want to see a Charles Xavier movie. And then I think the only person that really leaves at this point is Michael Fassbender's Magneto. And I don't think he's going to want to make a solo movie either. I think he has a lot that he wants to do. I think he's very game with the group films. He does a really good job. I think he's a big part of why they're successful. He's a great Magneto, as good as Ian McKellen. And I think he does, especially I loved in the last film that he copied Ian McKellen's speech pattern. I thought that was really impressive. But I think that he has so much else that he wants to do, even other genre films like Assassin's Creed, that he's not going to want to make a solo movie. So we're left with Channing Tatum as Gambit. And I think, Channing Tatum, I hope people give him the benefit of the doubt here, because he's doing a lot of really great things towards this film. For one, he really has a lot of respect and a personal affinity for the character because he's from the South, and he said he's working on his accent and he really wants to see Gambit portrayed well. And then also he's producing the film, so he really is taking it seriously. So I'm very excited to see him in it. And I'm sure that a solo movie was probably part of the deal that lured him into the franchise. They were like, not only will you have a small part in X-Men Apocalypse, but we'll give you your own movie. Now, how is that movie shaping up? Interestingly, not only is Channing Tatum producing, but it has a screenplay treatment by Chris Claremont. And I really like that for one reason, and I really dislike it for another. But the reason I like it is because I think it shows great respect to the comic book talent that's made these characters so popular in the first place. I wish that we saw more of this. I wish we saw more respect towards the writers and the artists who have handled these characters so carefully and successfully for decades, much longer than the current comic book movie renaissance. So it's great to see Chris Claremont getting to play here, to be a part of this movie, and especially because he co-created the character with Jim Lee. So that's really wonderful. Now, the reason I don't like it is that I'd say in the past decade, Chris Claremont hasn't written anything that's readable. I mean, I've tried to read his X-Men comics, but I think they're just so bad, and I can't get through them, to the point where I see Chris Claremont's name on an upcoming comic book, and I don't buy it at this point, because I just think, I don't know, I guess maybe he's lost it, or the comic book, the style of comic book storytelling has changed. But I think that he doesn't fit with it today. So I'm very happy that he will not be actually writing the script. He's just come up with the treatment for it. And that job is going to go to an up-and-coming screenwriter named, let me see, I have his name here, Josh Zatumer, who wrote the RoboCop reboot. And I think he did a very good job with that film. RoboCop was a good movie. It wasn't like one of the best movies ever made, but it was really solid, and I think it deserved to do better than it did. And I think the real problem for it was that it was remaking a classic film. But it was a really good movie, and a part of that was that it was well written. So I think that he's a good choice for this. But I'm curious if you want to see a Gambit solo movie, and do you have any faith in Channing Tatum in the role? Not only have I told you that he's taking a lot of, interest in this and taking it very seriously, but I think when you see Foxcatcher, you'll feel a little better because you'll see how far Channing Tatum is willing to go to give the right performance. And I think he might very well be going into the Gambit movie with some award nominations at the very least, kind of like Benedict Cumberbatch will most likely be going into his Doctor Strange movie. And it's been revealed that Sony Pictures Classics, who's releasing Foxcatcher, is putting Channing Tatum up for lead actor consideration. And I think while he'd be more competitive, he'd have a better chance in the supporting actor arena, I think that he has to be submitted for lead actor because when you see the film, you'll see that he actually has the largest role. And, that's also impressive that he's able to carry the film so well, considering his lack of experience in this type of movie. So I'm very excited. My only request is that a Gambit movie feature Rogue. We have a problem in that they've been separated by time. Rogue is in one timeline, Gambit's in another, but I really think that not only does Anna Paquin deserve a chance to redeem herself as this character because she's grown so much as an actress thanks to True Blood, and also I think, when she first was introduced as Rogue, she never got to play the character with her famous power set. I'm very excited to see the deleted Rogue scenes when they're released, I think in 2015 on a special cut of the DVD, a Blu-ray. They're going to re-release it with it's called the Rogue cut, as I previously reported. But I also think that the Rogue Gambit romance is one of the most iconic romances in the X-Men franchise. It's right up there with, I think, the Cyclops romances, both Jean Grey and Emma Frost. And I think that it's very important to both characters, but again, as I said, the franchise itself. So write your thoughts down below about that, and let's move over to another franchise, Pirates of the Caribbean, which also managed to get some headlines for itself late in the week when it was announced that there is a number of young actors, up-and-coming young actors, testing for the role of Henry. Now, I don't understand how this role can exist if Orlando Bloom is supposed to be coming back as was rumored. It hasn't been confirmed, but it hasn't been unconfirmed. And I think that to have Orlando Bloom and then a younger version of Orlando Bloom basically would be repetitive. But maybe Orlando Bloom isn't in the mix. Maybe that just was a rumor, or maybe it hasn't been settled and they're trying to secure another actor. But I think there might be another reason behind this, which we'll get to in a moment. But who are the actors that might take this on this role of Henry? Well, there's a whole list of them, but the two that I think stand out the most, I have them written here, are Taron Egerton from Kingsman: The Secret Service. I can't speak too much about him, obviously, because I haven't seen him in the role yet, but he looks very good in the trailer. He looks like he has a lot of star power. He really pops off the screen, especially for a newcomer. But then also Ansel Elgort. And I think Ansel Elgort in a Pirates of the Caribbean movie sounds like a pretty interesting idea. Ansel Elgort, I think, is not only obviously very popular right now based on The Fault in Our Stars, but he's actually a really good actor. And so I think that to have him in a movie like this, he could really do a lot with it. And it could do a lot for his career. Now, what was I saying about the other reason they might be casting such an actor in this role? Well, if I were Johnny Depp, on the one hand, I'd be like, well, this is great. I think both these actors could hold their own against me and wouldn't just be there for the sake of being there. But then the other problem is that particularly Ansel Elgort is so popular that if he's brought into the franchise, it might be Disney's way of backdooring a way for the series to continue without me. If I were Depp, that's what I would think. I mean, is this my young replacement? And I think Ansel Elgort could take over the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. I think he's that good. He's a very good actor, very charismatic, and again, has a really solid fan base at this point. I mean, which was the first motion poster that they released for Insurgent? It was the Ansel Elgort one. So I think this is all very interesting to see the way that it comes together. The other thing I would say is that if they're not thinking of a way to replace Depp going forward, I don't know why they have to have a young actor, because as you might recall, Sam Claflin, who was so impressive as Finnick Odair, was totally wasted in Pirates 4. So I would be like, why do you keep sticking with this formula that you insisted on for the first 3 Pirates movie with Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley? Nobody liked those characters, or most people didn't. No one was sorry to see them go, and I don't see why you need to find replacements for them. Just leave that formula be. But I think that Ansel Elgort in particular, and also, as I said, Taron Egerton, if he does a really good job in Kingsman: The Secret Service, could be huge. And it would be very Errol Flynn of Ansel Elgort, wouldn't it, to put him on a pirate ship? I think that could really, really, really do well. All right, so the third story of the day has to do with J.K. Rowling, and that she's continuing to poke at her Harry Potter franchise. Now, of course, she's very busy writing the screenplay for Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, as she tweeted with an anagram about the first line of the script, which sounded a lot like the first line of a novel. I'm very curious to see if she can do this. It's, as I've said before, you might remember, it's very difficult to write for different mediums. You would think writing is writing, but that's not true. Writing for a book, writing for a comic book, writing for television, writing for a movie. These are all very different skill sets, and it's hard to transition. But I wouldn't be surprised if Warner Brothers has somebody maybe come in and maybe do a rewrite or work with her. We'll see. We'll see. Although she's so powerful at this point, perhaps no rewrites was part of her contract, because it took a lot for Kevin Tsuchihara to convince her to continue this franchise. But she's also continuing on her own on her website, Pottermore. And for instance, she got a lot of press when she released a 1,700-word essay about Dolores Umbridge, that teacher's evil history. And there was a story on the Hollywood Reporter, which is why I wanted to cover this today, about where you can find all this new content on the Pottermore website. And I was like, what? This stuff is hidden? That seemed like a really weird choice on the part of both J.K. Rowling and Warner Brothers, which of course is intricately involved with the brand at this point. I don't know why you would want to make the continuing aspects of the story that are meant to keep the fan base engaged so difficult to find, because then you're really only allowing your hardcore fans to enjoy it. And how long can people stay hardcore Harry Potter fans if there's no new mainstream material? So I would actually think that it would be smart to do like a comic book maybe, or a series of books that take place in the Harry Potter universe, maybe with new characters that another author writes. And that's the big question. Could J.K. Rowling ever let another author touch her creations? I mean, it worked out pretty well for Star Wars, right? I mean, having all these different authors who were trusted and vetted by the company at large, the people behind the brand, tell these continuing stories. I mean, sure, they just jettisoned all that, but it did a lot to keep the brand alive for years since the original films came out. And that's why Star Wars, I think, has continued to be so popular as a brand. Maybe not so much as a franchise after the prequels, but as a brand, it really still has a lot of recognition because new material kept coming out. So I'm curious, are you happy with the way the material is currently being released and secret over at the Pottermore website, making you dig for it? Is that satisfying to you? Would you prefer to have more mainstream coverage, or the way the story continues with like comic books or books? And how would that be handled? Do you think it needs to be written by J.K. Rowling, or are you open to the idea of reading a Harry Potter-esque story, at least from the universe, maybe not about Harry Potter, that another author writes? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Write them down below, and let's transition over to our viewer question. Now this is from FrostCore, and FrostCore says, question, why is no one asking the obvious question? I'm glad you took it upon yourself, FrostCore. Do you think the next 6 years will be overloaded with comic book movies? Looking at the current lineup for DC, Marvel, Sony, and Fox, there will be about 30 comic book movies, with 21 in 2016 to 2018. Isn't this too much? I'd love to see a lot of these movies in cinemas, but I simply don't have the cash for it. I fear that good movies are going to be made, but no one will see them because people will experience comic book movie fatigue. Thanks. I always watch morning movie news while eating breakfast, and whenever you introduce yourself with good morning, I reply with good morning, Grace. That's awesome. I love it. I love hearing how you guys watch the show. Good morning, FrostCore. I hope you're enjoying your breakfast. And let me give you my thoughts on your question. Well, I think it's a very good point, and I think that while Marvel has succeeded with 2 movies a year, I think 3 is a bit much. And you can just, as I've said recently, go check out what happened to DreamWorks Animation and their schedule of releasing 3 films a year, and see how that's really hurt the company and has this current problem for them when they're trying to go private because the stock market doesn't understand what's going on with them and doesn't have a lot of confidence, and now nobody wants to buy the company. And so I think 3 movies a year turned out to be a very bad idea for DreamWorks Animation. And we'll see what happens. I think Marvel can survive it because Marvel has become a fantastic brand with incredible audience loyalty. And the other thing is they've done a really good job of creating this feeling that you have to see all the movies to understand the full story. So people will go and see all these Marvel movies, and I think they can space them out pretty well with 3 movies a year. 2 in a summer, I think I would bump one into like the spring, like they did with Captain America, the Winter Soldier. I think having the first weekend of May and then something in late July, that's a little close. And then, of course, a fall movie release as well is kind of what they're playing with. But I think Marvel doesn't have too much to be worried about. I think it's everybody else that has to be worried about, as you noted, FrostCore. DC, Fox, and Sony. And I think you could even argue that Sony is the first casualty here, as their Spider-Man franchise is just in complete chaos, and they don't know what to do with it, as we can tell from the stories that are coming out about what they're contemplating as a possible fix. But I think with all these comic book movies, most people will go. And I think the biggest problem is what this is turning Hollywood into. And the potential victim here isn't other comic book movies, but that audiences will only go to see comic book movies in theaters. And you'll have a situation where the mid-range movie can't compete. Because think about it, with all these movies in these years, as you pointed out, Frostcore, they're going to have to spread out across the release calendar to find a space to exist and have something of a run, before another movie enters the arena, to try and get as much cash as they can, possible. It's like Captain America: The Winter Soldier coming out first weekend in April. That turned out to be a brilliant move for them. So I think you're going to see, and also one of the Wolverine movies is slated for a March release. That's really early for this kind of film. So that's going to take away all the windows of opportunity for mid-range and small-range films. And I think what that's going to do is it's going to speed up the timetable for going to day-and-date digital release, where movies will, come out on demand that you can watch at home at the same time they hit theaters. And also, I think this will continue to blur the line between television and the mid-range movie, because they're going to be competing in the same area for your attention, which is your TV set. Gone Girl did a very good job competing in this area, but I think it's because of its incredibly high production values. But I think that's what's going to happen. And I'm curious what you guys think. Can you imagine a world where you only pay to see comic book movies? As you said, it's a budgetary restraint, Frostcore, and I really think Hollywood should be respectful of that. And that's why I came up with, somewhat in jest, but now that, I think about Frostcore's question, maybe the studios or the movie theaters should consider offering a movie pass to pay for all the comic book movies, and therefore you're agreeing that you'll see all the comic book movies that come out that year, and then the theater will make a lot of money in concession, obviously, and make sure that you're there. But I'm curious, if you have to drop a brand, because I think we're going to go by brand here, which brand will you drop? Will you drop the some of the Marvel movies? Will you drop DC? Will you drop Fox? Or do you agree that Sony is the real loser here? And do you have any faith in the future for the mid-range film? Write your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for your question, Frostcore. Have a great day. I hope everyone has a great day. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question. Anything you'd like to see covered tomorrow, any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.